Welcome back to The Third Space. I'm your host, Avi, and my guest today is Gilad Zuckerman. Gilad is a professor of linguistics who has made significant contributions in the areas of contact linguistics, lexicology, and the study of language, culture, and identity. He has a particular interest in the field of revivalistics, which deals with the transformation of dead languages into living ones. He has authored 4 books, the most notable of which is Revivalistics, From the Genesis of Israeli to Language Reclamation in Australia and Beyond. In 2024, he was listed as one of the top 30 living legends of research by the Australian newspaper. I hope you enjoy today's conversation. You've been described as a hyper-polyglot. As of today, how many languages do you speak?
I'm fluent in 13 languages, but I can read maybe 30. So it all depends on, if you give me enough time and enough dictionaries and enough grammar books, I would probably be able to read many more.
Right.
But for me, it's not, hyper polyglottism is not the goal. I have friends who are even more hyper polyglottic, so they speak 30 languages fluently, and but they just do it for the sake of speaking as many languages as possible. Whereas I have many years ago passed that stage. It's for me more to study languages that I can then use in order to help others. So it's usually small languages. It's usually unuseful, or not the most useful languages like Chinese or say Thai or Arabic, but rather say an Aboriginal language in Namibia or some of that people have forgotten, and I would like to help them.
Okay. Without sounding like a psychoanalyst, what language do you dream in?
It depends. So when it depends on the context of the dream. So I dream in Morse code. If it is about something that has to do with a transmission of Morse code, but then when I speak to my, say, relatives in Italy within the dream is in Italian.
So you're saying within the same dream,
Yes.
you can switch between...
At least 10 languages.
Wow.
So sometimes I wake up in the morning. And by the way, for me, dreaming in language is one of the symptoms of mastering the language. So the moment I started dreaming in Bangla, which is an Aboriginal language, or the moment I started to dream in Morse code, I remember that. And I remembered what it was. Then I said, okay, I have mastered the language. So dreaming for me, some people ask, what's a dream? So some people say, a dream is the rubbish of your thought, like a dream. But for me, a dream is also an indication of whether or not I'm fluent in the language. Not native, of course, because you cannot be native in Morse code. But so of course, when you dream in Morse, you kind of wake up sometimes having a headache because you hear that but I do dream. When I dream, so for example, I dream a dream in Adelaide where I live. So say I speak to my to one of my sons, and so it will be in Israeli, in Revived Hebrew. But then somebody called me, and he teaches for me at the university, and he's Italian. So I talk to him in Italian in the dream, and then I come back to my son, and so it is context based.
Yes. Okay.
Yes. So this kind of sentence, it all depends on context. In this specific case, it's the right answer.
Yeah. And when you switch between these languages, I'm not talking about dreams anymore,
Yeah.
although maybe also dreams. When you switch between them, do you find that different parts of your personality or different emotions come out?
Yes and no. The basic persona is the same. But the manifestation can be different. I sometimes am very influenced by the person I'm talking to. So if the person is very kind of Oxonian, highfalutin, like Oxford, I can end up speaking very kind of Oxonianly. It happens to me with some of my British friends, so I become kind of more British cosmetically. But of course, it won't change the basic passion I have for specific things, or I would still be much more passionate than my friend. But there is something kind of, in order to be a good foreign language learner, so I'm not talking about a native speaker, because a native speaker, a Japanese, you're born in Japan, or I'm sending you to Japan when you're a baby, you'll be a native Japanese speaker perfectly. Your Japanese will be. We used to say in Israel, where I was born, in England, every 12-year-old, the fuckwitest, he would speak perfect English. So lucky, because we had to struggle with English at the time. The point is that a native language is not learned, it's acquired automatically. But a foreign language, so a language you learn after puberty, you need 7 characteristics. And one of them is related to my answer to your question. But let me first explain the 7 characteristics. You need to be musical, mathematical, to have an outstanding memory, so photographic, or to have a high IQ, intelligence, high EQ, emotional intelligence, to be shameless, not to be afraid of losing face, which is a problem as a generalization for youth in Asia. Youth in Asia, they are afraid of losing face. They don't want to make mistakes. That's very bad. As a generalization, Jews are shameless but guiltful. So it's good for language. It's good for language learning. Yeah, exactly. And the 7th is motivation. Musicality is what makes me a little bit chameleonic vis-a-vis my interlocutor. So when I talk to my friend from Oxford, I kind of, it's almost like a musical adaptation. Don't forget one thing. When we speak languages, we never speak the very same idiolect. So, of course, I'm not a native speaker of English, and you are. But even if I were a native speaker of, say, Stryan, and we were born in the same place, my English would have been totally different from yours. How do we communicate? Through accommodation or negotiation. And by the way, this is why language shift happens regardless of external languages. So if you and me, if we go to the moon, and with some girls, of course, and after 1,000 years somebody comes to the moon, it's a totally different language. Why? Because your language is different from mine, her language is different from yours. You negotiate, and this is the cause for language shift, for language change, because each and every person speaks his own idiolect. So when I say language, I generalize. It's an abstract ensemble of idiolects, sociolects, dialects, ethnolects, and other lects. It's a collection. It's a collection of lects. And therefore, if you talk to a linguist like me, and the linguist says, I never generalize, you know that he's a spy. Because a linguist ipso facto generalizes, because you must generalize to say anything about language. If a linguist says, I don't generalize, you know he's not a linguist. Because generalization is at the very heart of language, because language is a generalization. But if I come back to your question about what happens when I talk to another person, like, how do I change languages? It's a little bit like driving. So I remember I used to drive on the right, but then I moved to England, I moved to Oxford, and then I moved to Cambridge. So I said, at the beginning, okay, so here it's on the left. So, now, when I drive on the left here, I go to Israel, I just do like that. Look, I just do automatically. I'm versatile. So the same with language. If you're an Italian, yeah, and I like dreaming, I like singing in Italian, I just do like that, and I speak Italian. No English thinking anymore. The only time you think about another language, in my case, is when you have a word that you do not have in the other language. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to cover that later. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, because I heard there's this research showing that native languages are processed differently in the brain than languages acquired later in life. So I'm wondering, from that sense, does your mother tongue qualitatively feel different to you when you speak it compared to?
Yes. So there are two things that I use. One is when you count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Most native speakers would count in their native language. So when you do like mathematics, because arithmetic, you were in. Well, I was kind of a mathematical prodigy when I was a child. So at the age of 4, I did a lot of mathematics. So of course, when you ask me something, I would do it in Israeli. Yeah? But the other thing is in times of severe emergency or stress, Jordanian pilots, they would speak in English. This is their normal. But before they crash, they resort to Arabic because they know, it's emergency. So if, say, I'm just hypothesizing, you, say, moved from Romania to Australia post-puberty, you speak very fluent Australian, but when you see a snake, yeah, you would resort to Romanian because you would shout. Let's say you are an ophidiophobe. You suffer from ophidiophobia. You're afraid of snakes, so you would shout. In Ukrainian, all the swear words are in Russian. It's kind of weird. But this is kind of natively in Israeli. Most of the swear words are in Arabic. Yeah. So when an Israeli gets kind of stressed or angry or traumatized, or he or she would shout Arabic things, which is not good for peace in the Middle East, because sometimes I happen to know Arabic beyond swear words, so I speak several Arabics because there are several Arabics, by the way, apropos generalization. But most Israelis do not speak Arabic. And when they encounter an Arab and let's say they have something, so the only thing they know would be the swear words. So it's not good, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I want to dig a little deeper now into your passion field, which is revivalistics.
Yeah.
Can you give a brief summary of what revivalistics actually means within the scope of linguistics? Yeah.
Look, revivalistics is a new, emerging, comparative, global, transdisciplinary field of inquiry surrounding language reclamation, revitalization, and reinvigoration. Reclamation is when the language had been killed or had died. No native speakers. Hebrew, for 1,750 years, 1750 years, was a sleeping beauty, no native speakers. In the year 1000 AD, nobody spoke Hebrew natively. Nobody. Bangala, which is an Aboriginal language of Eyre Peninsula, like Port Lincoln, Whyalla, Port Augusta, had been a sleeping beauty or a dreaming beauty. I call a sleeping beauty in Australia a dreaming beauty, like Jukurpa is dream time, so I made up this sleeping beauty for Hebrew and dreaming beauty for Bangala. So Bangala had been a dreaming beauty for, say, 50, 60 years before the reclamation that I began together with the Bangala people of Port Lincoln, Port Augusta, and Whyalla. This is reclamation, no native speakers. There is also revitalization. So revitalization is, for example, of Maori, Te Reo Maori in Aotearoa, New Zealand, the land of the long white cloud, Aotearoa, that's a meaning, but some Maori, they reanalyze it as the land of the wrong white crowd. So wrong white crowd instead of long white cloud, and they're not Chinese. Some people say, oh, flea market, is it free market, flea market? I mean, they have etymology like that. Yeah. This is revitalization because Maori had always had native speakers, but they were fewer and fewer because the New Zealand government, there was a period in which it tried to kill Maori. This is called linguicide, language killing. Adnyamatna of the Flinders Ranges, this is not far from Adelaide, it's a language still spoken by some elders, but it's severely endangered, so it requires revitalization. And then you have reinvigoration, like Welsh, Irish. I mean, you have a lot of speakers, but still it's endangered. So revivalistics is on a spectrum. You have the reclamation, which is the most severe case. You cannot use the master-apprentice technique in the case of reclamation. Master-apprentice technique is when you take an elder who is a native speaker and you match him with a young person who does not speak the language, and the young person would do shopping for him, and then the elder would speak to the young person in language, and so it's kind of symbiosis. You cannot do it for reclamation because there are no elders who speak the language. You can do it for revitalization and for reinvigoration, but reclamation is what I'm an expert of, and I am also an expert of reclaiming languages that had been subject to linguicide. Because look, there are 7,000 languages in the world. Within 100 years, we will end up with 700 languages. So 90% of languages would become sleeping beauties. Now, it means that I have many languages to work with. And of course, there are many languages that had already been killed. So I need to choose. I choose a language to work with according to social reasons. So firstly, the language was killed, meaning the government says, if you talk in the language, we'll kill you. Or they stole the babies from the mothers.
Right, and then taught them the main language of the area.
Yes, exactly. And unfortunately, it happened in Australia a lot. In Australia, we had 400 Aboriginal languages. Now we only have 12 alive and kicking.
Wow.
Which is 3% exactly. So 97% of Aboriginal Australian languages had been subject to linguicide or are about to fall asleep. And linguicide, some people tell me, oh no, it's the Aboriginal people who decided to get rid of their language. Well, so how would you explain a person like Anthony Forster, who was an Adelaidean in 1843? He said, and I quote, the natives would be sooner civilized if their language was extinct. This is what he said. He was cruel, but of course, at the time, everybody was cruel, not everybody, but many people were. So don't forget that Aboriginal people were considered part of fauna. So there were some hunters of Aboriginal people. Some Aboriginal people were poisoned like rats. So of course this ideology of linguicide is the main reason for the demise of 97% of Aboriginal languages. So firstly, the language was killed. Secondly, the tribe would like to reclaim the language. If the language was killed and the tribe does not want, I'm not going to do anything because I don't believe in a laboratorial revivalistic project. I only believe in kind of alive and kicking negotiation.
I do want to come back to and talk about Indigenous languages in more detail soon, but first I want to talk about modern Hebrew.
Yes.
Many regard it to be the most successful project of reclamation or revival of a language. You regard it, or you refer to it as Israeli Hebrew.
Yes.
Obviously that hasn't been widely adopted, but many scholars do agree with you that distinction should be made. So why do you make that distinction, and why does it matter?
Firstly, anything about language in Israel matters a lot, to the extent that the prime ministers discuss languages in the Knesset. I remember Ariel Sharon, as prime minister, criticizing the word bye instead of shalom. So in the Knesset, I mean, it's crazy. It's like Albanese, like, would he ever say, "Don't say nowhere is mine"? Like it's unheard of. But in Israel, I remember Yossi Sarid, who was a politician of Meretz. It's kind of in the left wing, and he was very right wing about language. So he said, "Eser shekel," which is what Israelis say for asara shekalim, so 10 shekels. In Israeli, there is no distinction between the numeral. So the asara is feminine, and shekalim is masculine. But in Hebrew, the ancient language of Isaiah, you had an amazing phenomenon called polarity of gender. You put the numeral that is feminine with the a at the end, yeled, yalda, so yeled is boy, yalda is girl. A little bit like in Italian, the a, it's for feminine. Bello is a boy, and bella is a beautiful girl. So asara is feminine, shkalim is masculine. This is Hebrew, crazy. Maybe it's because there was a superstition that you're not allowed to count people. So, for example, when Moses counts, then God punishes them. When the rabbi enters the synagogue, he doesn't say achad shtaim, he says hoshea et amecha uvarech et nachalatecha ureem unsem ureem ad olam. Olam, 10 people. Why does he do it? Or he does not one, not two, not why? Because it's forbidden. So it's a superstition, and therefore you counted the soldiers, who were boys, of course, as girls. And this is just a hypothesis. I mean, this is kind of thousands of years ago in Semitic languages. Maybe because of that we say asara shekalim in Hebrew, but in Israeli we say eser shekel, just like in Yiddish. Tsen shekel, don't say tsenet. Tsenerene is something totally different. Tsenna or ena is the Bible, like go out and see for the girls. They read the Bible. It was called tsenerene. But in Yiddish, like you just say tsen. Doesn't matter whether it's girls, boys, it's 10. Yossi Sarid said, Eser shekel ze kishkush batachat. So it's like kishkush batachat. It's like a swear word. It's like a horrific thing. He was very right-wing when it comes to language. So I answered the second part of your question, why it matters. Because language is, like people, not only linguists like me, people actually care a lot about language. Why is Israeli not modern Hebrew? Well, it is modern Hebrew, but it's also modern Yiddish. But nobody calls Israeli modern Yiddish. Why? Israeli is not an organic evolution of Hebrew, because Hebrew for 1,750 years was a sleeping beauty. Nobody spoke it natively. And as you perspicaciously said earlier, when you speak a language natively, something else in the brain is lit. It's a totally different place in the brain. I mean, this is kind of neuroscience. They show it today. If you get a stroke, God forbid, suddenly you do not speak the languages that you acquired as an adult, and you resort to your native language. We know in Melbourne, some Yiddish speakers, they got a stroke, and I mean, they hadn't spoken Yiddish for many years. They spoke kind of English with a Yiddish accent, but suddenly they don't speak English. And the nurse has to know Yiddish because they go back to the original central, and the peripheral brain is dead because of the stroke. So we know it medically that when you speak a language natively is different qualitatively than when you speak a language that is not. Now, I'm not saying Jews throughout the generations, they went to shul, they prayed in Hebrew, etc., but it was not their mother tongue. You cannot talk about an organic evolution. So what is Israeli? Israeli, which is from 1886, that's when Itamar ben Yehuda begins to speak. He was the son of Eliezer ben Yehuda, who is considered the revivalist. The main revivalist, of course. I mean, we need heroes, like there were others, like Bialik, etc. And I think Bialik neologized more than Ben Yehuda. He coined more new words than Ben Yehuda, and there were others. But 1886, you have this Itamar ben Yehuda starting to speak in Israeli, and in fact it happens at the age of 4 because he couldn't produce any sentence or anything because he was, I don't know, you need a psychiatrist for that, but Eliezer Ben Yehuda came home and saw Itamar's mother singing a Russian lullaby, and Eliezer Ben Yehuda was so angry that he took the table and threw it on the floor, and it became like many pixels. And Itamar Ben Yehuda then produced an entire sentence at the age of 4. That was the beginning of Israeli.
Wow.
It's a traumatic beginning because Eliezer was obsessive, monomaniac, which is good for language revival. You need to be monomaniac. You need to be obsessive because otherwise you don't do it. And then you ask yourself, what is this language? Well, it is not an organic evolution of Hebrew. It is a hybridic revolution or a hybridic genesis deriving at the same time from Yiddish, the Mameloshen of Eliezer Ben Yehuda and all the others. Almost all the others were Yiddish speakers. It is, and this is subconscious influence. You can't help it. Even though you search for ancientness, any nationhood movement searches for ancientness. We, like the Belarusians, the Ukrainians, they want to be. We are the most ancient.
Gives validity, yeah.
Validity. So Zionism exactly was, okay, we speak Hebrew, the language of Isaiah. They don't mean Isaiah Leibovich. They mean Isaiah, the other prophet. And you see, the point is that you cannot, and this is the beauty of linguistics, you prove that you can't deny your most recent roots, even though you're trying to go to your ancient roots. Now, I'm not saying, I checked my DNA. I'm from 3,500 years ago from Israel. So I'm from Israel, 3,500 years ago. That's in my DNA. I'm a Kohen.
Yeah.
I'm a Kohen from Israel. And so I know that my roots are in Canaan. At the beginning, I thought maybe Arthur Koestler, he wrote about the Khazars who became Ashkenazic Jews, etc. Maybe I'm not really Jewish. I'm not from. I am in the genes, But I am also from Italy. I'm also from Germany. I'm also from the Czech Republic. I'm also from Poland. I've found out that I have a little bit of Sephardic. I have a little bit of somewhere in Hungary. So what I'm saying is that Eliezer Ben Yehuda hated Yiddish, but it was his Mameloshen. Ben Gurion, I don't know if you know that, but when Reisel Korczak on the 1st of February 1945, she addresses the Histadrut, the pre-state organization that Ben Gurion headed, David Ben Gurion, the first prime minister of Israel, and she spoke in Yiddish, which was her Mameloshen. She was a Holocaust survivor. She was a partisan. And Ben Gurion comes after she speaks in Yiddish and telling all the people about the massacres in Europe during the Holocaust. And Ben Gurion comes and says, and I'm quoting, זה עתה דיברה פה חברה בשפה זרה וצורמת. He says it in Israeli. We've just heard a member speaking in a language that is foreign and cacophonous about Yiddish. Now, what was his mother tongue? Yiddish. So he hated Yiddish, but he could not help but having a Yiddish, Polish Yiddish, Galician accent in Israeli. So Eliezer Ben Yehuda wanted you to say Asara Shekalim, like an Arab, but you can't help it. I mean, Itamar Ben Yehuda was much cleverer. You know how people look at kids and say, oh, they're so clever. Yeah, because kids are more clever than you think. If there is kind of an argument between the parents, the kid would notice that, and if Ben Yehuda pretends to be a native Hebrew speaker, the kid knows that he is not a native Hebrew speaker. He doesn't know it in the meta language, but he knows it in fact. So what I'm trying to say is that Ben Yehuda can force the kid to pronounce Ain and Quf and Tet and Sadiq like a Yemenite, like an Arab. But the kid knows what is grammatical and what is not. And what is grammatical is according also to the Yiddish. So Israeli is not monoparental in the sense that it does not have one parent. it is multi-parental. It has several parents. On the one hand, it's a phoenix rising from the ashes. I invented this metaphor. On the other hand, it's a cuckoo laying its eggs in the nest of another bird, tricking it to believe that it is its own offspring.
Ah, that's Yiddish.
Yiddish. So it's Hebrew and Yiddish. And on the third hand, which is very Jewish to think in one hand, on the other hand, you ask me, it's a magpie, stealing from Arabic the swear words, stealing from America the cool words. Nowadays we have many Americanisms, stealing from Russian, from Polish, from Italian, from French, from Ladino a little bit. We say Chanukia, from Chanukia. It's from Ladino, but we say chamorico, like a small donkey, chamor, chamorico. Ico is from Ladino, but Ladino did not influence much, absolutely not as much as Yiddish. So Israeli is, on the one hand, a phoenix, on the other hand, a cuckoo, on the other hand, a magpie. It's a finny-cuckoo cross with some magpie characteristics. And if you want, this on the one hand, on the other hand, on the third hand, on the fourth hand, on the fifth, is at the epitome of Jewish thinking. Have you heard of Fiddler on the Roof?
Sure.
So when Hodel says that she was going to marry a Bolshevik called Perchik, Tevye, who is an Orthodox Jew, he's very upset. He asks, why? And she says, oh, because I love him. I said, love? It's a new style. And then he says, on the other hand, our old ways were once new, weren't they? On the other hand, they decided without parents, without a matchmaker. On the other hand, did Adam and Eve have a matchmaker? On the other hand, well, yes, they did. And it seems that these two have the same matchmaker. And he looks at the sky like he looks at God, This is, for me, the epitome of Jewish thinking. So when I introduce this Israeli synthesis or syncretic analysis of the genesis of Israeli, of modern Hebrew, or revived Hebrew, I actually felt that I was doing something very Jewish. Ironically, I was attacked as if I was kind of desecrating the Jewish thing. We went back to our ancient language, etc.
Yeah, it seems like it's kind of like this political pushback against Yiddish. I heard of it's kind of like a sub-ideology of Zionism called Shlilat Hagolah. It's negation of the diaspora. And basically, the central premise is that the Jewish people have no future without the spiritual center of Israel, and that the diaspora and the Yiddish language, they evoke in the mind this image of the poor, persecuted, dispossessed Jew. And I think a lot of modern Israelis want to distance themselves from that. I wonder, do you think that's part of the...
Absolutely. And Shlilat Hagolah has another component, and it's Shlilat Hadat, so the negation of religion, of religiosity. The reason being that the diasporic Jew, as a generalization, was religious. So Zionism, as a generalization, of course you have religious Zionism, was based on Shlilat Hagolah and Shlilat Hadat. And therefore, you have a word like Blorit, Belorit used to be the mohawk that only the pagan had. And the Jewish Baba in the Mishnah could be the hairdresser of the pagan to make money, but the moment he touched the Belorit, which was a mohawk, he had to stop because it was kind of abominable. The Zionist makes the Blorit, which now means the forelock, the fringe, the ultimate characteristic of the new Jew, of the Palmachnik, of the IDF warrior. And this is, for me, the negation of diaspora, because the diasporic Jew was very kind of orderly with a yake, with a jacket, like with a tie, with a very kind of feminine, as homosexual, persecuted, as you said. But also, Zionism was negating the religiosity. So, Belorit is anti-Jewish. Well, it's the most important part of the Palmachnik. So we are atheists, we are, What my research into linguistics demonstrates is that Israel failed on both accounts. it failed in the negation of diaspora. In other words, Israel is diasporic, and it does not, in a way, suit the environment where it is.
Israel is diasporic. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, so you look at the institutions, you look at the language, you look at the way people are, etc. It is still a replication of the shtetl. Even Burekas films that are the most Sephardic kind of Mizrahi films where you see the laughable Mizrahi persons. In fact, if you look at the directors, they're usually Ashkenazim. And if you look at the content, it's like Shtetl Kapziel by Mendel and Moiche Sforim, but adapted to a Mizrahi environment. So it's all camouflaged. I have a friend, Rami Kimchi, who has recently written a book about Burekas films as a manifestation of Ashkenazic culture, shtetl culture. So what I'm trying to say is that, and this is a little bit kind of extrapolating from language. I'm a linguist, I'm not a political scientist. But a lot of what you see in Israel is galuti. It's despite the attempt to kill the diaspora, you cannot, because I'm Israeli. I live in Australia, but I'm Israeli. I cannot pretend to be Australian, born and bred. It doesn't matter whether I have an Australian passport. I'm Israeli. And the same with my father, who was a Holocaust survivor from Italy. He came to Israel. He was Italian, Jewish Italian. And he could not help it. And therefore he said batarea, not bataria, batarea with a r, like, so he had the r. I'll tell you something funny about the r. But coming back to your point, I think Israel is also a manifestation of the failure of negating religiosity. I am a secular Jew, but if you look at Israel, religion is there. I mean, there are many religious people.
Yeah.
So Zionism was established, in my view, as a generalization to negate the diaspora, to negate religion, the Jewish religion. Both failed. And you see it in language. In the case of religiosity within the language, yeah, it's true. You can take your car for a tikkun. Tikkun means fixing the car. It's true that the auto mechanic does not think of tikkun chatzot, shavuot, tikkun shavuot, refinement of the world, etc. This kind of Kabbalistic idea. But if you go to Mishkan, Mishkan, it's where the Knesset, the building is Mishkan. But when you say building, you miss a lot of the echoing of sanctity, because Mishkan is where you work God in the Bible. Of course, when you enter the Mishkan, even though you're secular, you're atheist, you still, Mishkan, it's like you have angels, Shin Anim, you have Malachim, you have Kruvim, you have many types of angels inside, rather than, say, thieves or, So it has this kind of deification, as opposed to kind of secularization. You go to Miluim. So Miluim in the Bible is a period from the ordination of Kohanim until they start working the temple. It was a period, Miluim. But now Miluim is when, for example, when I finished my military service, I had Miluim. Every year I had to go for a month and a half for Miluim. So my reserve duty was not to work God, but it's to work the nation, the country, the land. So God is dead, if you want. The nation is a new God. That was the idea of Miluim. Now, of course, most Israelis do not know what Miluim was in the Bible. They forgot it. But there are some words that are, as there was a guy called Rosenzweig, Franz Rosenzweig.
Oh, yeah.
And there was a guy called Gershon
Sholem?
Gershon Sholem, or Gerhard Sholem. Gershon Sholem. His name was Gerhard too. He was born Gerhard. Gershon Sholem writes to Franz Rosenzweig, they were friends, and he says the Aktualisierung, in German, they wrote, the secularization of Hebrew is a façon de parler. He says it's just like a lip service. You cannot secularize a language that is exploding out of sanctity. He was very Kabbalistic in the way he looked at and it's true, because one day maybe a rabbi would come to you and say, oh, you take your car for a tikkun. Come to me at midnight and I'll show you what you can. So it's a shortcut. Yeah. It's a shortcut, and it's dangerous. I mean, it's dangerous in a way. So we cannot negate our roots. And our roots, even though I'm secular, my roots are rabbis.
Yeah.
My roots are diasporic.
Yeah. I think just on that point, I think it's more of an issue, a universal issue of atheism, more broadly speaking, because I think people have a tough time divorcing themselves from religious symbolism and ideas and that sort of thing.
You say goodbye, God be with you. Yeah, goodbye. I mean, how many people are aware of, it's kind of a residue within.
It's deep within our psyches. Yeah, I think so. I do have one more question while we're talking about Israeli Hebrew, before we move on. I'm very interested in the experience of Israeli children today who have been brought up speaking Israeli Hebrew, but learn the Torah in classical Hebrew. Like, from your understanding, what's going on there? What's that experience like?
Well, the experience they have is the same experience I had, because I was a child in Israel, and in Kitab Bet, which is like 8, at the age of 8, or 7, 8, I was introduced for the first time to Tanakh, to the Torah. And I was told this is written in Hebrew. Hebrew is my mother tongue, and I couldn't understand why it was so hard to understand what was going on there. I mean, Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. Please forgive my Israeli accent of the Hebrew, because Hebrew would have never been pronounced like that. Bereshit. So Bereshit means at the beginning of. But they don't say at the beginning of what? They just say Bereshit. They don't say Bareshit. Bareshit is at the beginning. Okay. Bereshit is at the beginning of. It's like Bitchilat. Bitchilat what? At the beginning of. I mean, I remember I said, Bereshit what? They didn't say. Bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. So created God shamayim va'aretz. So we thought it was shamayim, like heaven, and aretz, which is kind of soil, earth. But of course, it was not the meaning. The meaning of shamayim va'aretz in the Bible is, it's a merism. Merism is when you use the extremes to refer to the whole. For example, when you say zaken v'taf, zaken means old and taf means baby. It doesn't mean old and baby. It means everybody. It means 52-year-olds. It means 30-year-olds. So you use the extremes to refer to the whole. In Australia, there is a family of languages called Pama Nyunga. Now, Pama is in the northeast, like Bamaga, northeast of Australia. And Nyunga, it's in the southwest, like Perth. Pama Nyunga, it's not Pama and Nyunga. It's Pama and Nyunga and everybody in between. It's a merism. Now, Shamayim va'aretz, it's not sky and earth. That's total misunderstanding, but this is how Israelis understand it. It's world. Now, why don't they say olam? Because olam in Hebrew means eternity. It doesn't mean world. So, like me'ata ve'ad olam, from now until eternity. So you see, Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz, va'aretz hayta tohu vavo. Now, I thought as a child in Israel, tohu vavo means balagan, chaos, like a lot of chaos, a lot of things, balagan. You come here and everything is kind of, actually it means the opposite. And in Yehoyesh, which is the translation of the Bible into Yiddish, I understood what it means. Ler. Ler means vacuum, nothing, nothingness. So tohu vavo means nothingness and nothingness. Like tohe vebohe means I mishtomem. Shmama means nothing. So I wonder, like wonderland. So nothing, zero. Tohu vavo in Hebrew means the opposite of what Israelis understand. They understand there are many, many things that are in a chaos. No, it means there are no things. So when I read the Bible as an Israeli speaker, I misunderstand it all the time without realizing that I misunderstand, because I think it's Hebrew, because I was told, yeah, it's Hebrew, it looks Hebrew. Ekdach, ekdach is, it's like I have an ekdach, so it's a pistol. Of course, in the Bible, it doesn't mean pistol. Chashmal, yeah? Chashmal means electricity. Of course, in the Bible, it doesn't mean electricity. I mean, you don't need to be a rocket scientist to understand that. But Israelis are taught to believe this is in your mother tongue, but they totally misunderstand the Bible. I would argue that Bible lessons in Israel should be linguistic lessons, the learning of a foreign language called Hebrew. You can use some advantages as an Israeli speaker. For example, we use the script, which is Semitic, the same script, which is not Hebrew, it's Aramaic, but it doesn't matter. But the same script as in the Bible we use today for Israeli. But, I mean, like Turkish used to have an Arabic script. Now it has a Roman script. I mean, script, it's one thing and language is another thing. In Chinese, by the way, script is very important. So if Chinese suddenly would be pinyin-ized, so it would use like Roman script, it would be a totally different language because of the nature of the characters in Chinese. But in Israeli, it doesn't really matter. We can use Roman script. It's called litun. Litun is Latinization. And there have been kind of movements even by Itamar Ben Yehuda to Latinize the script. And the reason is that if you're dyslexic, don't be born in Israel, because Israel uses a Semitic script for a Yiddish phonology. So for example, ikvotav means his traces. I saw a dyslexic writing Aleph, Kaf, Vav, Vav, Tet, Bet, but actually it's Ein, Kuf, Bet, Vav, Taf, Yud, Vav. So this guy wrote Ikvotav it's kind Noach mit sieben Greisen, so like Noach with 7 errors, which is a Yiddish expression. Some people say Kreisen is like circles, Noach mit sieben Kreisen, because when you write Noach, there's 7 circles. But Noach mit sieben Kreisen is like when you totally misspell, So look, it's a hard one.
Yeah. I said that was going to be the last question on the topic, but I can't resist. I have one more. You said that Israeli Hebrew has the characteristics of 3 creatures: the phoenix, the cuckoo, and the magpie.
The phoenix, the cuckoo, and the magpie.
Which direction, as we move forward into the future, do you see and foresee Hebrew going more in the direction of?
That's a very good question. You know why? I have read, when I lived in Cambridge, I was at the University of Cambridge, and I met somebody who'd conducted research about migratory birds. And he found out 2 things. Firstly, that birds, homing birds, not migratory birds, they go according to the highway. So they kind of, so let's say they go like M11 and then there is a roundabout and they go like that and they continue. So they just actually look at but migratory birds, they are born with the direction they have to migrate. So it's genetic. But if you take a migratory bird that goes like that and a migratory bird that goes like that and you hybridize them, the result is a vector in the middle. Unbelievable. So in other words, you take a word, so it has nothing to do with food. It's like this is where they go genetically. Now, why is it related? I've never thought about this, but your question is very, very perspicacious. So I've never thought about it. I believe in the founder principle and also in the congruence principle. So firstly, with the congruence principle, the more contributing languages a linguistic feature exists in, the more likely this feature is to penetrate the emerging tongue. So if, for example, Ein is only in Hebrew and in Arabic, but in Russian, Polish, Yiddish, you don't have Ein, like Gilad. My name was Gilad, but everybody said Gilad, like Julia Gilad, Gilad. I mean, the difference between Gilad and Gilad is just the stress, Gilad, not Gilad. And therefore some people write my name as Gillard, like in Australia, like Gilad, but actually it'sGhil''ad because I write it like Gilad, but of course nobody pronounces it. So the congruence principle is the more, so Esser Sheker, so Polish, Yiddish, they don't have a polarity of gender, so why should we have? So Esser Sheker. The other thing is the founder principle. Whoever founded the language is the most influential person or people on the language forever. What I'm trying to say, there were 10 Russian speakers at the beginning of Israeli. They were more influential than 1 million Russians at the end of the 20th century, 100 years later. The 1 million Russian speakers who came to Israel, how did they change Israeli? They didn't change. We know nash control, our control. We know spasiba, we know da, but do we say chelbanim instead of chelbonim? Because, Russian, they say chelbanim. There is this palatalization. No, Israelis continue to speak chelbonim. Do we speak like Americans? Because American is very influential now. We don't say barad, yorad, bidrom, sfarad, ha'erev with a resh because of American. Absolutely not. Israelis continue to have a Yiddish accent even today. So I believe that shift happens, and this is why there are linguists. Linguists love the fact that shift happens. But Israeli would continue to be a hybrid of Hebrew and Yiddish, and in 100 years, it would not be so different from my Israeli. I asked a very old man, have you changed throughout his life? And he told me something very perspicacious. He said, you know what? To be honest, I haven't changed, but at a certain point, I discovered who I was. And this is exactly what happens to Israeli. Israeli, people kind of said, oh, you're Hebrew. And then Israeli at the beginning of the 21st century says, you know what? I'm actually not Hebrew to start with. I'm a hybrid. And you said at the beginning, many people dislike my Israeli theory, but you would be surprised. More and more people accept. It takes a very, very gradual acceptance. It will come. So in 100 years, I think that it will be the mainstream.
Yeah. All right. So I want to shift gears now and come back and talk about Indigenous languages. Can you tell us about your efforts over, I understand it's been the last 2 decades, to help in the revival of the language of Bangala in South Australia?
Yeah, so I arrived in Australia for the first time in 2001. I was 30. And I remember arriving in Sydney. And I couldn't believe how beautiful it was. I said, wow, that's amazing. It's beautiful. I was very well hosted. I went back to Singapore. I was visiting professor in Singapore on sabbatical from Cambridge. And then I went back to Cambridge. And then I said, I should apply for something in Australia. And I asked and said, oh, there is nothing for linguists, nothing. And then I said, oh, what a pity, because Australia is such a good place. And then somebody contacted me and said, look, there is something at the Institute for Advanced Study at La Trobe in Melbourne. And I applied and I got it. It was a good stint for a couple of years. I arrived here in June 2004. Exactly 20 years ago. And I asked myself, I'm so grateful to the hosting society. What can I do? To help. And I said, okay, let's check. What are the problems in Australia? This is the question I asked. And I remember very quickly, I realized the first and most severe problem, in my view, some countries are aristocracies, like, say, Britain. Some countries are democracies. Some countries are hypocrisies. Australia is a bureaucracy. Bureaucracy is the biggest problem, in my view, and I'm still, by the way, behind it, of Australia. I'm surprised by some Australians talking about France being a bureaucratic state. I said, what do you mean? France is less bureaucratic than Australia. In Australia, there is a form for everything. In France, there is no form for it. So I saw it big time at the universities here. But what can I do? This is 2004. I can only swallow the bitter pill. I'm a professor. I'm a linguist. I'm a researcher. I don't deal with bureaucracy. You know. Okay, what's the second most severe problem of Australia? It was very quickly the Aboriginal plight, the Aboriginal history, the fact that Aboriginal people were here and their lands were taken, their, their languages were killed. But I said, look, what am I? Had I been a dentist, I would have given Aboriginal friends of mine teeth because they have no teeth. My friends have no teeth. Had I been a psychologist, I would have taken my Aboriginal friend out of smoking. All my friends in Adelaide do not smoke, so nobody smokes. And all my friends in the bush smoke. It's unbelievable. I've never seen such a divide, which is an ethnic divide. I mean, it's crazy. I don't know how many people you know in Melbourne who smoke. I mean, like, not too many I know. Every person I know in the bush smokes. It's crazy. Oh, no. Now, but I'm not a dentist. I'm not a psychologist. What am I? I'm a linguist. And then I said, how many languages were there? 400. How many are alive and kicking, meaning spoken by 100% of kids? 12. Wow. So what happened to the others? They were killed. Wait a second. I'm an expert. I said, I'm an expert of language revival. I have been an expert. I had been an expert of the Hebrew revival. The Hebrew revival is the most amazing achievement by Zionism. Despite resulting in a hybrid, nothing is wrong with being a hybrid. I am pro-hybrids. Many people are afraid of hybrids, as if the original language was pure. No, the original language was also a hybrid. When you talk about Proto-Semitic or Proto-Indo-European or Proto-Pamanyungan, it was also a hybrid. I mean, we are all hybrids. I mean, we're all from Africa, and So I said to myself, let's establish a niche. And the niche was applying lessons from the Hebrew revival to the reclamation, revitalization, and reinvigoration of Aboriginal languages in Australia and beyond. And I said to myself, I'll do it on 3 levels: micro, macro, and mukro. Do you know mukro?
Mukro,
No. So let's begin with Mukro. MOOC is a massive open online course.
Ah, yes.
But of course, this term came later, and I produced a MOOC of language revival. I've had already 20,000 students, 190 countries, Syria, Afghanistan, anywhere, 190 different countries. I mean, it's almost all countries. Macro, I would publish a book, and it happened several years ago, Revivalistics, you've mentioned it, that would introduce revivalistics as a new transdisciplinary field of inquiry. I did it. That's the macro. And anybody in the world would be able to get out of it if they want to revive a language. Micro, I would eventually find a tribe whose language was killed, whose language they want to revive, and whose revival is going to be a pain, it's going to be very hard, it's going to be complex, convoluted, because I don't want to find an urban revival, or everybody lives in Melbourne, everybody lives in Brisbane. That's easy. I want something tough. And then in 2011, I was appointed endangered languages professor at the University of Adelaide, so endangered that I'm the only such professor. I had been the only such professor in Australia, so no other professor of endangered languages. And so endangered qualifies not only the languages, but also the professorship. And I found this Barngarla tribe of Port Lincoln, Galinyala in Barngarla, Wayala, which is Wayala, and Goodnada, which is Port Augusta. Port Augusta is Goodnada. Not too many people know it, but now more and more people, because we introduced a sign in Port Lincoln, Galinyala. So now many people say, oh, Galinyala. So that's a name of Port Lincoln originally.
So it's got both names now.
Yeah. This sign is only in the huge port. There is a port, and like Queen Elizabeth II, and they go there and they see Gallignala. It's not yet official in the sense that it's not like Port Lincoln Gallignala, but it will happen. It's just a matter of bureaucracy. It takes time, and many forms. And then I invited 5 Bangala elders to my office in Adelaide, and I said, look, I have found a dictionary written in 1844 by a German Lutheran missionary called Clamor Wilhelm Schurmann. He had been born in Bissendorf, Osnabrück in Germany, and he was part of the Dresden Lutheran Mission, which is now Leipzig Lutheran Mission. They changed from Dresden to Leipzig. I have visited all these places in order to get to know the persona. This guy came to Australia in order to Lutheranize the heathens, to show them the light. Il Padre, il Figlio e lo Spirito Santo. Yeah, like in Italian they say the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. He was a Lutheran, so he was not Catholic. But when you go to Italy, you hear it. He thought, in my view, that he was doing the right thing by showing them Jesus. And therefore, unlike the Anglican Lutherans, he decided to learn the language of the heathens and to teach Jesus in their language. The Anglicans would have just said, learn English, we'll teach you we'll teach you Jesus in English. He said no. And this is very beautiful because 180 years later, you have a Jewish, secular Israeli using a dictionary written by a Lutheran Christian missionary for indoctrination about Jesus. This dictionary is used again by a secular Jew for the opposite goal, which is aboriginalization, because in the dictionary he actually mentions many sacred words that can reconnect Bangala people to their spirituality, which was very complex. And of course they had God. And there is a famous story about Karl Strelo, who was another missionary. And he interviews an Aboriginal person many centuries ago and many decades ago, and he finds a word. Tell me, and what is this word? And the Aboriginal person tells him, and then he says, "Holy shit, this is God! They have a God, the bastard!" They have God, these heathens. Yeah. So what the heck am I doing here? They had God already, So this is kind of in the case of missionary. Now I and the Bangala people, we do it together. They're at the wheel. I am the facilitator. We do it for the opposite goal. It's beautiful. And the other beautiful symmetric writing of the wrong of the past, technology killed these languages. The ships that brought the colonizers, the Anglo-Celtic colonizers, the weapons, the black cars that brought the governmental official to steal Howard Richards, my friend, from his mother. These were technologies. Now we use technology. I can show you an app that we developed in order to reconnect with the language. So technology killed, now it's healing. So the same. So you see, this kind of, I told them, I found this 1844 dictionary. I know your language had been killed 50 years ago. This was in 2011, yeah? And if you want, we can revive it. They told me, and I told them about the Hebrew story. Some of them knew. And they said, oh yeah, but you're Jewish, you're very clever, we are not so clever. And you speak the language of Isaiah. These are all Christians, they know Isaiah. And I told them, actually, you know what? We don't speak the language of Isaiah. It's a hybrid. And I said, okay. So in fact, what I did, I used my theory about Israeli to make them less frightened, because they thought, oh, it's only Jews, who are clever, they can do that. We are stupid. Seriously, there was this kind of self-deprecation, by the way, which is very interesting, because Jews are self-deprecating. Yeah. Aboriginal people are self-deprecating. Anglos are not self-deprecating as a generalization. So self-deprecating sense of humor is not an Aussie thing. It's Aboriginal thing, it's Jewish thing. Very
Right.
interesting.
Is it a minority thing, generally speaking?
Not every minority is self-deprecating, but you're right. There is something about suffering as a minority that makes you self-deprecating. You're right. But I think Jews are very self-deprecating. I mean, kind of a typical Jewish joke that I guess some non-Jews might feel a little bit ashamed to tell unless there are no Jews around is, what's the difference between a German, a Frenchman, and a Jew, The German says, I'm tired and thirsty, I must have beer. The Frenchman says, I'm tired and thirsty, I must have wine. The Jew says, I'm tired and thirsty, I must have diabetes. So this is self-deprecating. Now, I discovered, and I would be very happy to stand corrected. Look, I had been an Aussie just 20 years. So I'm not an Aussie, of course, born and bred. Aussies, as a generalization, they do not laugh at themselves. They laugh at the other, at the expense of the other.
Yeah.
Jews, they don't laugh at the other. They laugh at themselves. Aboriginal people laugh at themselves. And when I know Aboriginal people very, very well, they allow themselves to be Aboriginal with me, so they laugh at themselves.
It's very interesting. This is a bit of a tangent,
Yeah.
but I heard Stephen Fry talk about the difference between American humor and British humor. American humor, they prefer to be the one making fun of someone else, and British humor, they prefer to be the one being made fun of.
Right.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I know Stephen well.
Okay.
Stephen is a wonderful man.
Yeah.
And I told him recently that I was very happy about what he did for Christmas. He says that no anti-Semite will define my Jewishness. That's exactly what I feel. I will never allow an anti-Semite to tell me what I need as a Jew to think, what I do not need. I mean, you will not pigeonhole me. That's a very, very clever thing. And Stephen told me something very funny. Stephen is of course Jewish. Half Jewish or whatever you want to call him, but he's very Jewish. And he told me about his grandfather who was escaping from somewhere in Eastern Europe, maybe Hungary, but he took the ship in Kiel in northern Germany, so kind of not far from Hamburg. And from Kiel, there was a ship going to England. And this was in the 30s, or, he escaped the pogroms. And he had been told, don't speak Yiddish, because they will know that you were Jewish. And because, of course, he spoke Yiddish. So he was very educated, so he knew German. And of course, on the ship from Kiel to England, there were many Germans, not just Jews escaping. And he saw many seagulls, like near the port. And seagulls in German is Möwen, M-O-umlaut-W-E-N, like Mövenpick.
Yeah, the ice cream.
Yeah, the ice cream and also the hotel, Mövenpick, it's because the person who initiated Mövenpick, he saw the seagulls picking the food and said, oh, wow, look at their elegance, and said, Mövenpick, let's call it Mövenpick. But he says Stephen's grandfather said, oh, I'm not going to say Möwen, because Möwen, as in maven, it means an expert in Yiddish, maven. But it's unrelated to Möwen, but he thought of maven. And because of hypercorrection, he said, I'm not going to say Möwen, because they will think I'm Jewish. I'm not going to say maven. So he looks at the seagulls and says, viele Sachverständigen, which means experts in German. So the German said, Entschuldigung, excuse me?
Yeah.
Viele Experten, oder? There are many experts here. And so, wie bitte? How? How, please? And of course, then he said, oh shit, it's not Maven, it's Möwen. And then he said, oh, viele Möwen. But I went to Darwin and I bumped into a German and said, look, let's do something. So what I did, I spoke to the German and said, viele Sachverständigen. Entschuldigung, viele Experten, oder? Wie bitte? Viele Maven. And then the guy said, "Sind Sie Jude? Are you Jewish?" You know, like I made it go, "Nein, ich bin ein Goy." You know, I'm a Goy. And of course, Goy would only be uttered by a Jew. No, Entschuldigung? Ich habe mein Bar Mitzvah nicht gemacht. I didn't do my Bar Mitzvah. Entschuldigung, was ist Bar Mitzvah? Oh, and then I said, ich hasse gefüllte Fisch. I hate gefüllte Fisch. And I sent it to Stephen. It's a true story. And Stephen immediately replied, Gilad, you've made me laugh so much. And I also hate gefilte fish. He said, and you know, although I'm Jewish, you know,
Yeah.
the truth, I love gefilte fish, but I just made up a thing. So Stephen is very clever and very Jewish, and I would take what he says, although I've never thought about it, and he has never told me about the American British humor.
Yeah. Sorry to get off tangent. You were talking about how the Aboriginal elders were in your, not elders, but
They told me,
the spokesman were in your office.
they told me, we've been waiting for you for 50 years. That's what they told me. The moment they told me that, I first self-funded, went to the bush, then I was helped by the government. Now we established a grant, so I continue to go to the bush. I have arrived after 13 years at the point in which I'm trying to pass the baton, because unlike the missionaries, I don't believe that I should always be there to make them depend on me. I totally disagree with that point of view. You know, kind of the white savior who come. No, that's your language. That's your responsibility. That's your dedication. You know, it's not because, I mean, there is this kind of, look, I think the Australian government has made so many mistakes with Aboriginal. For example, I believe the dole is a mistake. I have Aboriginal people whose great grandparents were very good workers and very, you know, and this kind of, I've learned something in Australia. No good deed goes unpunished. You know, this is a very Aussie thing. Crazy. And the dole is exactly that. Native title, again, another mistake in my view. So destroyed communities. The relationship between communities. So for example, Port Augusta, so you have the Kukara, you have the Adnyamatna, you have the Bangala fighting over an area for native title. And then you have within the tribe many feuds. So it was a good intention, good deed, but the result is atrocious. I don't believe in native title. I believe in native tongue title. Native tongue title, it's kind of my pun based on native title, is the idea that if you can prove that your language had been subject to linguicide, language killing, you have to receive an ex gratia compensation for the sake of revival. And this money would be put in a bank, and it would only be used for revival activities, for changing the landscape, the linguistic landscape. Landscape with a G, yeah, exactly. And also for making the language the official language of the region. Mm-hmm. Also for workshops. So when you have a workshop, you know, you need food, you need, sometimes you need canvases to, you know, you paint on top, you need a shed. So I have to rent a shed where I teach, etc. So it consumes a lot of resources. You need to pay the teacher. So I am kind of passing the baton through training Aboriginal people how to teach the language to their kids, because it's their language. It's not my language. I will never be Bangala. I'm kind of an honorary Bangala, but I will never be a Bangala. And there is more and more kind of geneticization. I personally don't like it. Helen Mirren is beautiful as Golda. I don't care that she might be, well, it turns out she is Jewish, but I don't care if she's not Jewish. I have been the president of the Australian Association for Jewish Studies for many years. I'm very happy to have a Christian or Muslim or whatever who is the president. I don't think that you should be genetic with this regard, but I acknowledge that there is more and more understanding that, okay, that's an Aboriginal language, an Aboriginal person should be in charge. I have no problem with that. I can give a lot of consultancy, a lot of advice, pro bono, but it should be. So this is exactly the situation. Now I'm dealing with other languages, Bayungu in Western Australia. I work in Thailand, I work in Namibia, I work in New Zealand, I work with the Kanak languages in New Caledonia, with Tibetan, with Mongolian. So it's a global endeavor.
You mentioned that the local people that you're teaching Bangla to, they own the language and you're merely a facilitator, or you can only make recommendations towards them. So I'm wondering what it means to own a language. Is that something that only really makes sense within the sphere of, or the life cycle of a language being revived, or is it something that can be applied to a language that's confined to a very clear, small area or group of people, or do all languages have owners?
It's very interesting. When I arrived in Australia, I was totally ignorant about language ownership, because for me, as a Jew, if you want to use any Yiddishism like schlep or chutzpah, you don't need to ask a Jew for that. You just use it. I'm very proud when a Christian American uses the word chutzpah or schlep. I love it. I am totally oblivious to appropriation, like when, I'll give you an example, like somebody wrote in Haaretz when Asi Dayan died. He was a famous actor and the son of Moshe Dayan, the famous general and defense minister. He died, and the editor of Haaretz wrote, Hu diber Israelit, he spoke Israeli. I received maybe 100 emails. We loved your article in Haaretz. I didn't write any article in Haaretz. No, you wrote, Hu diber Israelit. You made up the term Israelit. No, it's the editor of Haaretz. I'm so happy that he appropriated the term Israeli. But then they said, but he didn't mention you. I said, who cares? Because, he likes it. He took it. That's wonderful. I love it. So I was totally, I was interviewed on the radio by somebody called Peter Gers, and he says that he received a complaint from somebody. She said that he should never use an Yiddishism because he's not Jewish. And he asked me, is it true? I said, absolutely palpable poppycock. I give you, as the president of the Australian Association for Jewish Studies, the imprimatur, the gushpanka, you can use it, the stamp. But then I learned something in Australia. You can be a language owner, 100%. Language users, 0%. You know nothing about the language, only the name, one word. And you're the owner. And then somebody else is a user, 100%, he knows the language, but he doesn't own anything. He has no right. At the beginning I said, shit, that's crazy. Like, if you are Jewish and you don't know anything about Hebrew, and then you have a German theologian who is a great Hebraist, as it used to be the case, of course a German can talk about Hebrew, can give a lecture about Hebrew, in Konstanz or in Stuttgart or whatever. He doesn't need your kind of permission. But then I realized, no, I cannot talk to you in Bangla here because it's in Melbourne. I should go back to the bush and I should ask for permission. Then I have to respect it, So, like in Rome, be Roman, no, don't be Romanian, Anyway, so I realized this distinction between usership and ownership. In my view, a healthy language situation and an indication of fluency and of 100% of the kids speaking it is when the Aboriginal people say, no worries, everybody can speak the language. They don't need to ask for permission. Anybody can teach it, etc. We're very far from that in the case of Bangla. So currently the Bangla told me, firstly, nobody except you can teach Bangla unless they're Bangla, not even an Aboriginal person. They need to be Bangla, genetically. I say, okay, you're the owners, you decide. Look, to be a revivalist, it's a little bit like being a stepfather. You're not the mother, they're the mother. You're the stepfather. If the mother tells a child something, you as a stepfather can say, oh, this is rubbish. But you're not allowed to say that because you're the stepfather. They're the mother. It's like co-parenting. It's very hard to co-parent. You need to kind of be very calm and not to kind of coerce or force your view. You need to have a heart of gold, balls of steel. I mean, it can be a woman, of course. I mean, it's not, don't take it genetic, don't take it as...
It's a metaphor, yeah.
It's a metaphor, yeah. People these days do not agree for metaphors. You need to have the patience of a crocodile. Crocodiles, they can wait for you for 4 days. Or the patience of a saint if you're not a zoologist. And you need to have the willingness or to understand that you might be a punch bag or a punching bag. You will be there when somebody might be aggressive, violent. I mean, you're exposed to everything. You're in the bush. You deal with people who had lost everything. And it's social work, it's intellectual work, it's benefactor work, it's a schlepper, it's a driver, it's a cook, it's everything. It's fascinating. And what I love about it is that it allows me to combine the ivory tower with the grassroots. And, a philosopher, of Wittgenstein, might never get to the grassroots. I get it every day. Every day, an Aboriginal person would call me, excuse me, can you help me with this? Can you send me some money for that? You cannot escape it. Sunday, Saturday,
Yeah. You were saying that there are benefits to the local population when they go through this language revival. Can you explicitly
Yes.
talk about those benefits?
If I want to kind of make it like in the army, there are always three. Everything in the army is divided into three. I would say ethical, aesthetic, and utilitarian. So ethical has to do with the right thing to do. What I do, in my view, is what any Australian who is capable of language learning and who might have some time to donate to Aboriginal people ought to do. I'm using a general term, we killed these languages. We are obliged to revive them. This is an ethical righting the wrong, the past. It's deontological. They deserve to be revived. That's it. It's just ethical. That's why I do what I do. Aesthetics has to do with what is beautiful. Diversity of languages. It's beautiful. I mentioned to my students a word that I learned in Tierra del Fuego, in Yagan, Mamishapinatapai with a kha. So to look one at the other, hoping that the other side would initiate something that both of us really want to do, but so far nobody has had the guts to initiate. I remember having this feeling when I was 15, but I did not have a word for it. And then suddenly say, oh, wow, look how beautiful this word is. It's beautiful to have a word like that. I mean, you can live without it, but it's beautiful. So linguistic diversity is beautiful. Just like you have many types of pandas, koalas, and you pay money for, the Tasmanian devil. You also need to pay money for the Palawa languages of Tasmania. So that's my idea of aesthetics. We are human beings, we love beauty. The third, and this is something I discovered while working in revivalistics, it's utilitarian. In other words, it's not about what they deserve, it's what makes them happy and improves the mental health, their well-being, reduces suicidal rate. In 2007, there was a very important article which was published in Canada about the correlation between language loss and youth suicide. Lalonde, Chandler, and others, they looked at 6 tribes, Aboriginal tribes in British Columbia. One of them, their language was killed, a lot of suicide. Another where the language was safe, no killing, no suicide, and then the 4 others had a correlation. So the more killing of the language, the more suicide among youth. They said language killing results in suicide. It's a correlation. I found that just as language killing results in suicide, language reclamation results in the reduction of suicidal ideation, and also in the feeling it gives me a purpose in life. Now, I'm quoting from Aboriginal people. It's liberating. I think the whole family would be much happier about each other, and our ancestors are happy. You know, when I heard this, our ancestors are happy. I said, wow, that's a very good sign, because Aboriginal people use this thing. Our ancestors are happy. So then this well-being thing, I said, oh, wait a second. I tell the government, give me $1.1 million, I'll save you 5. How? Then I quantified. I became a bean counter for the sake of getting money for the Aboriginal people. How much is incarceration? You know, $150,000 without opportunity cost.
Per person.
Per person in Australia, per year. Without the opportunity cost, like this person could have been a waiter or could have been a professor or whatever. How much is hospitalization in a mental hospital for youth? I made a calculation. It's several thousands of dollars per night. How much is this? How much is that? So unless you live in a society where they say, actually, it's good to have fewer people, so let them commit suicide, and I don't think we live in such a society, you actually can say to the government, you can quantify. Now, I hate bureaucracy. You remember, I told you, so I don't like, but then I realized that it depends whom you talk to. With a politician, you can talk about ethics, but with a civil servant, you need to talk about utilitarian benefits. There are other utilitarian benefits. You're bilingual, natively bilingual, you're more clever than yourself as a monolingual. You can concentrate more. So if there is a tram noise here, as a bilingual, native bilingual, I would be able to concentrate on your questions much better than if I'm a monolingual. So these are all utilitarian benefits. So it means that if I work in a company, I can concentrate more per the 8 hours, etc., etc. So this is very important to cover yourself from many angles. So the ethical is why I began doing it. The utilitarian is why I'm continuing doing it. And the aesthetics is what makes my life more beautiful with this linguistic diversity.
Sure. I'd be remiss not to ask, what specific steps can we as non-Aboriginals living in Australia do, other than petitioning our local politicians to, reallocate taxes for language revival efforts? Is there anything else that we can specifically do to have a tangible impact on the communities?
Yes, absolutely. One of the things one can do is to ask the region to have more and more signs in the original language.
I think in New Zealand they have that.
There are 2 official languages. Guess what they are? So of course, Te Reo Maori. Te means the, Reo means language, and Maori means Maori with a long A. Yeah. Te Reo Maori, the language Maori. That's the first official language of New Zealand. What about the other?
English?
No. English is not de jure, it's de facto. So it's not legal, but it's de facto. Of course, everything is in English. Yeah. The other official language, surprise, is New Zealand Sign Language. And when you go to Wellington, which is the capital, everything is in English, de facto, and Te Reo Maori. Of course, not in sign language because it's too complicated. They should show a video, But it's hard to show a video with a sign. I mean, maybe in the future we'll do it with AI, etc. But currently it's not. But in Australia, it's not the case that every, say, we are opposite Glenira town hall. I didn't see anything in language, which is local. So firstly, to answer your question, ask or tell the local people we are happy with languages, with other languages, because there is something in Australia. People suffer from a monolingual mindset. What's a monolingual mindset? It's a term used by my late friend who was from Melbourne. His name was Michael Klein, Clyne. He had some Jewish background as well, but he was kind of educated as a non-Jew. Monolingual mindset is the fear of other languages and the idea that everybody who comes here must speak English and preferably only English. So, for example, my Aboriginal friend from Port Augusta told me he went to a bar, a pub or a hotel, whatever, and he saw two Chinese people speaking in Mandarin and or in Chinese. He didn't know the difference anyway. So, and then he heard two Anglo Aussies saying, "Look at these bastards! They come to Australia and they do not even learn our language." And then my friend went to who is Aboriginal. He went to the Anglo people and said, "Hey, wait a second! Did you learn my language when you came to Australia?" So this is the irony of it all. Like you have kind of the monolinguals urging everybody to speak only English, which is the language of Australia, except that no, the language of Australia was Bangla, it was Wirangu, it was other languages. So I think monolingual mindset also means that if you are an Aussie and you want to contribute, why don't you inspire your children to study other languages, not necessarily Aboriginal languages. It can be Hebrew, it can be Yiddish, it can be Israeli, it can be Italian, it can be Vietnamese, it can be Arabic, it can be anything. I hear a foreign language in Australia, I go and I see, oh, maybe I can recognize the language, maybe I can say to them something, maybe I can ask. To the extent that when I lived in Melbourne between 2004 and 2006, I took a taxi from Tullamarine to RCLT, Research Centre for Linguistic Typology, that was part of Bandura, La Trobe Bandura, doesn't exist anymore. And I took a taxi with some kind of a Somali, and I discussed language with him. And then 10 years later, I was invited to give a lecture at that same place. And I took a taxi from Tullamarine. I entered the taxi, and the guy says, "I'm from Somalia." And I ask him questions. "Hey, wait a second. I took you 10 years ago. I took you on this taxi, and I know exactly where you go. You go to that." And I said, "Oh, you remember from 10 years ago?" And he said, "Yeah, you're the only one who asked me questions about my language, etc." I said, "What do you mean? You had 10 years? Like you've taken tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people." And he remembered me from 10 years before. Can you imagine that? It just it made me feel shit. I mean, so what do people do? They never ask him any question. They just shut up. Or, I mean, they're not the Israeli type, like when in Israel, the taxi driver tells you everything you need to know about politics.
Yeah.
So, and the other thing, maybe they ask him, but they never cared about language. And when it comes to loving of other languages, the moment you love Hebrew and Yiddish, then you will also love Bangla. You know what I mean? So it's all related. It's a domino effect. The other thing you can do is when people discuss health, you have to understand it's not only for scientists, diabetes and sugar level. Actually, it's also about the arts, the humanities. I believe that language revival can reduce diabetes. How? It's not that, like a doctor friend of mine said, "What are you talking about? It's the sugar level." Of course, I know it's a sugar level. I'm not an idiot. But language revival results in a feeling that the Aboriginal person has that actually, the language is complex. The language is beautiful. It's not primitive. It's not simple as some people made me think, because don't forget the tragedy of colonization is double. The colonized person hates the colonizer. Well, that's understandable, but there is another thing. The colonizer
Hates themselves.
exactly.
Yeah.
This self-loathing, which is a generalization, of course, and it's politically incorrect to say, in my view, is a tragedy of colonization. So you can see it everywhere in the world. This kind of self-loathing also includes, our language is not developed. It only has 3 numbers, Guma, Guda, Ragaba, so we don't have mathematics. Well, you don't need mathematics if you're a hunter-gatherer. Why do you need to count more than 3 kangaroos? So whenever somebody tells me, oh, Aboriginal agriculture was very complex, it says, well, had it been so complex, then why do you say Guma Gudara Gaba only 1, 2, 3 in Bangala? But my point is that there is nothing wrong with a hunter-gatherer. In fact, I eat like a hunter-gatherer, except that the next morning I have breakfast. So you know what I mean? So we are originally hunter-gatherers, so it's not a big deal. I mean, so some people might say hunter-gatherer is good. So what I'm trying to say is that language revival improves your feeling about yourself. Then you're less depressed. Then you're eating better food. Then you're less obese. Then you have less sugar levels. Then you have less diabetes. So
Second order effect. Yeah.
Exactly. It's a domino effect. And you, as a taxpayer, needs to know that tax money should not only go to kind of hard science, it should also go to language revival. And therefore, I want language revival not to be under the arts, the humanities, because they're totally underfunded, but rather under health. We saw in the pandemic, the panic, how many trillions of dollars were wasted. Let's put language revival under that, under health. Then, of course, we'll have much more money. And in fact, several years ago, I said to myself, I'm not applying for ARC, Australian Research Council. I'll apply for NHMRC, National Health and Medical Research Council grant. And I got it with an Aboriginal friend of mine. And we looked at the correlation between language revival and mental health. That's exactly what we were researching. And we found out that there is a correlation.
You mentioned just before that another thing we can do is encourage our children and others to learn a second language, learn an Aboriginal language. And I think part of that effort is we need to inspire curiosity. And you mentioned Wittgenstein before. He has this really good quote, which is, the limits of my language are the limits of my world.
Right.
And I love that quote.
Now, look.
Yeah.
Look, so Wittgenstein's idea here was what we call Whorfianism. So Benjamin Lee Whorf and Sapir, who was a Jew, they came up with this Sapir-Whorf hypothesis that Wittgenstein's beautiful sentence can be an exemplification of. Practically, the language determines the way we think. On the other hand, you have people on the other side. So, for example, Chomsky, Noam Chomsky, not his father, who was a fervent Zionist, as Ev William Chomsky. His father was a Chomsky because he was in a kibbutz in Israel. And then he went to Philadelphia, and then Chomsky was born. In fact, Noam himself says that if there is a ch in the language, you should pronounce his name Chomsky. So in Israeli, I say Chomsky, and in English, I say Chomsky. So he wanted the pronunciation to be according to the language. Because in English, most people do not have ch, unless you go to Loch Ness, the Nessie. And so Chomsky would argue that that is not the case, because he believes in a universal grammar, and he believes that people are the same in any language, because in the deep structure, it's the same thing. I actually am in the middle between Whorf, Wittgenstein, Sapir, and Chomsky. I believe that on the one hand, if I don't have a word for passion in my language, I can still be passionate. Whereas, if you're a strong Whorfian, you would say, well, if you don't have a future tense in your language, you will never be able to plan for the future, because there is no future tense. I disagree. However, I do acknowledge that the language, the specific language you speak, or the specific languages you speak, and here you can see the broadening your horizons by having more languages, influences the way you think, not determines, but influences. I will give you an example. In Israeli, the word for bridge is gesher. Gesher is masculine. In Italian, the word for bridge is ponte. Ponte is masculine. But in German, the word for bridge is Brücke. Brücke is feminine. Die Brücke, not der Brücke, not das Brücke. Because in German, you have 3 genders. Apropos transgender, etc. You have three genders, der, die, das. If you ask an Israeli or an Italian or a Frenchman to describe a bridge, you would be surprised. I would say a bridge is sturdy, a bridge is strong, a bridge is big. If you ask a German, they say a bridge is elegant, a bridge is beautiful. And of course, the reason is that the grammatical gender that somebody once compared with the male nipple, which is a double fallacy because it's not like it's so he wanted to say it's kind of it has no function. But of course the male nipple has a function. It's erogenous, it's or erogenous, whatever you call it, erogenous. Yeah, it's erogenous, and grammatical gender, in fact, changes the way you think about the word subconsciously. So that Germans would be much more likely to say that it's elegant because the feminine is elegant, etc., as a stereotypical thing. So whoever tells you that there is no difference between, girls and boys or all this kind of wokeist new ideas, it's poppycock that you see in language. And this is why language can help, in my view, in the debunking of many theories. So, for example, people talk about agriculture. So, well, 1, 2, 3. So why is there is no agriculture? People talk about, it's the same girls, boys. Well, not really. And so what I'm trying to say is that I agree with Ludwig Wittgenstein partially, but I don't agree as a whole. I think that we still have this ability to imagine beyond. However, I have to say that when sometimes I watch films with aliens and they look like ugly human beings, like 2 eyes, 1 nose, and 1 mouth, I say to myself, holy, we are fucked. I mean, humans are so stupid. 3 billion years of DNA evolution, and you end up with an alien coming and he looks like us. I mean, think about it. It's crazy.
What are the odds? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's bullshit. I mean, unless you believe that the universe is infinite, which I don't believe, but if you believe that the universe is infinite, you say, well, of course there will be a man somewhere there, but then why would he come here? I mean, so the chances that, of course, there are no aliens, but let's say there are, the chances that they look like ugly human beings or ugly Asian people or whatever, like they look in films in Hollywood, are so 0.0000001% that it makes me feel very ashamed for Homo sapiens sapiens Israelicus vulgaris,
Yeah, I do like that distinction that you made whereby language doesn't constrain our ability to feel, but it does influence and it draws attention to certain experiences.
Absolutely, and it changes our ability to explain.
Yes. I wanted to ask you, have you heard of the Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows?
Of obscure words?
Obscure Sorrows.
Sorrows. Oh, it's not by Buono.
No, it's actually a New York Times bestseller. It's kind of like a coffee table book by John Koenig. So it started off as a blogosphere on the internet, and then eventually I think it built up quite a cult following, and then it ended up becoming a compiled book. Basically, the project is about describing universal experiences that everyone's had.
But there was no word for it.
There's no word for it, and people put in their own suggestions, and they take it from all different languages and they combine it together.
So like Schadenfreude in German is when you're happy that some, and Scheissenfreude is when you're happy that you see the shit. The bird shitting on somebody who is there. So it's Scheissenfreude. So it's like Schadenfreude. So what you're saying is that it's a neologization by people.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's like a bottom-up, democratic effort.
That's amazing.
Yeah, honestly, to this day, I can't work out if it's a serious project or if it's just like elaborate poetry. It's probably both. But I wanted to share with you one example, just so you can know what I mean. So there's this word I like called midding, midding. It's from Middle English, midden, which means a refuse heap that sits near a dwelling. And what this is, it's a verb. It's feeling the tranquil pleasure of being near a gathering, but not quite in it. So you're hovering on the perimeter of a campfire, or you're chatting outside a party while others dance inside, or you're resting your head in the backseat of a car listening to your friends chatting up front, feeling blissfully invisible yet still fully included, safe in the knowledge that everyone is together and everyone is okay, with all the thrill of being there without the burden of having to be.
Wow, that's
It's a beautiful word,
beautiful.
yeah. So when I
Yeah.
first heard that, now every time I'm in that situation, I revel in it.
But you know, this gloss, this definition could be a poem.
Exactly, yeah.
So it's a little bit like, I mean, komorebi in Japanese, komorebi, there is a beautiful, I think, 5-minute skit about it. Komorebi is a word that describes the light that comes from between leaves of very tall trees. So the girl and the boy are sitting and they see komorebi, and then they discuss words that are about very weird things. So, for example, this ability to only see in twos. So you see two people, two these. So there is a word in Japanese for it, etc. I love words that are very unique with this regard, and I'm now going to look for this the dictionaries of unknown sorrows, obscure sorrows. There was a book by Boineau about dictionary of curious words from all over the world, and you know, and Stephen, apropos Stephen Fry, he used to invite Boineau to QI, quite interesting, and they would ask questions about it. I have to tell you that when you translate from one language to another, you can become a poet inadvertently. So I was in Port Lincoln, in Coffin Bay actually, and I ate an oyster. Apropos oyster, as in somebody who complains, you know, like say oi, oi, you know, oyster. And I got very sick. I got Vibrio parahemolyticus. It's called Vibrio parahemolyticus. It's a very bad disease. It's like salmonella. And I was interviewed because I called the government and said, you must close down the entire, and they closed down, by the way, because more and more people got sick. And they asked me on the radio, what did you feel like? And I translated from my mother tongue, Israeli, and I said, I felt like vomiting my soul. Lehaki et anshama. This is a very common expression. So I vomited my soul. Ani iketi et nishmati, et anshama. I received, after this interview, at least 5 email messages from many poetic groups in Australia and said, dear Professor Zuckerman, we would like to ask you to come to address our poetic group about poetic language. And I said, why? Oh, because you use this poetic language. No, I just translated from, you know, I'm not a poet, I just translated. So the easiest way to be poetically original is to translate from a very different language. Some people did it in England. They translated from Russian, like Isaiah Berlin, apropos philosophers. He just translated from Russian, you know. And he, you know, it was just that per se made him very famous, you know. So translation is very poetic.
Yeah. I don't want to put you on the spot here, but if you were to make a submission into the Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows from an Aboriginal language, let's say, or another language that you've encountered, can you think of any words that you would?
Oh, I can think of many, but one thing that I find very beautiful in Bangla, there are 2 things, well, 3 things. Firstly, the word for tree is almost identical to the word for telling a story. So wadlada. So whenever a Bangla person sees a tree, he thinks about a story. And whenever he tells a story, he thinks about a tree. And is it like tree of knowledge or tree of communication? And you know, when I was in South Africa, I saw a tree. It looks like a tree, but it's where they put the aerials of the mobile phones. But it looks like a pine tree. And I thought of wadlada, like communication tree. because Wadlada also means communication. But for me, that was a very good word for it, Wadlada. So it's a tree, but it's also for communication, like for Telstra or whatever, like the aerials. So Wadlada. The other beautiful thing in Bangla is that in English we have singular and plural. You have emu, emus. In Bangla, you have 4 options. You have singular, dual, plural, and superplural. If you have 1 emu, you say waraja. If you see 2 emus, you say warajalbili. If you say emus, like 5 emus, say warajari. But suddenly you go to a place where you see, say, 50 emus, heaps of emus, there is a word warajalyarana.
Just like too many to count.
Heaps of emus,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Like lots of emus, a huge amount of emus. So you have waraja, warajalbili, warajari, warajalyarana. And the third thing, which is fascinating, if we are related to each other, and we are talking with somebody else, and so we too, there is a dual pronoun. If you are my sister's son, I would use a pronoun which is nadlaga. Nadlaga, with a nga, nadlaga. But if you are my brother's son, we too would be narini, narini. If I say nadlaga, people say, what's happening? I mean, it's wrong. It's narini. I would never say naranga instead of narini, because before I open my mouth, I must determine whether we are related to each other through a woman or through a man. And this is so important because it tells you that languages differ not in what they can say, but in what they must say. In Bangla, I must use nadlaga if we are related to each other through a woman. I cannot use nadlaga if we are related to each other through a man. In Israeli, I must use ani ohev otach if I'm a man and the other person is a woman. I cannot say ani ohevet otcha. Whereas in English, you can say I love you. Nobody cares if it's a woman or a man. So if I'm a singer of a song in Israeli that was written by a woman to a man, ani ohevet otcha, I cannot sing it because I'm a man. So languages differ in what they must say, not in what they can say. And this is why the native speaker, they do it automatically. But of course, when you revive a language, it's so hard for a Bangla to say, oh, wait, are we related to each other through whom? It's crazy. But it shows you how when you kill the language, you also kill the necessity to know kinship. Because you don't care anymore, because it's not manifested anywhere. And then, by the way, you end up marrying people that you would have never been able to marry, because in the language, you knew, oh, I cannot marry her because she is a... This is so important. So language changes reality. You asked me at the very first question, why does it matter? Why language matters? Well, it matters because it would end up, okay, am I allowed to marry this person? Am I not allowed to marry? Yeah. It will change the entire life. It would change So there are some tribes in Amazonia where you're not allowed to marry somebody who speaks the same language as you. You must marry somebody who speaks a different language.
Interesting.
Yeah, so just imagine everybody now speaks Spanish. Of course, the culture is gone. I mean, like this. By the way, of course, it was kind of an economic, maybe even genetic advantage for marrying out. Then you get some economic benefit. They will give the tribe some presents or whatever. Or maybe genetic, some people have theories about genetic diseases, within the family or things like that. So you need to marry out according to the language. You don't have DNA test. So you only know, oh, you speak the other language. So language is what actually determines your othering. Oh, this guy is not like me because he speaks differently. This is how Aboriginal people knew whether you were another or you were a part of them, according to the language. not according to DNA testing, not according to, oh, you look white, I look black, or whatever like that. It was all language.
I think we're running out of time now, so I'm just going to end on this one question, and it's a bit of a preamble, so just bear with me.
Yeah,
It's a bit speculative as well.
yeah.
There's a word I came across recently called glottophagy,
Yes.
which is the absorption or replacement of minor languages or dialects by major ones.
Yeah.
And this is a real phenomenon that's happening in the world today. You mentioned at the start that there are 7,000 languages spoken worldwide, and I think there were some researchers at I think it was the Australian National University. They predicted that by the end of the century, 1,500 of the 7,000 will be considered endangered. So this is a very real thing.
I would argue 6,000. So I think that 90% will die.
God,
90,
that's
90.
that's even more harrowing. Wow.
Oh, yeah. So we will end up with 700 because we will lose. So we will lose 6,300.
Wow.
So we will lose more than 6,000.
You said, I've heard you say this, that to be considered endangered, it's not about the absolute number of speakers, but the percentage of children who speak it.
Exactly. So you have endangered languages with 1 million speakers, and you have healthy languages with 4,000 speakers, like Pidgin Jar, because all the kids speak it. 4,000 people. That's it.
Wow, that's interesting. Yeah. So getting back to it, so one of the factors that these researchers cited that was kind of a correlate with language decline was in places where there was less language diversity, there were more roads, and roads bring about globalization. It's kind of like the great leveler of bigger languages coming along and Pac-Manning the smaller ones.
Yes.
So globalization.
So the more roads you have, the fewer languages you have.
Yeah. I thought that was a pretty interesting way of putting it.
This is a correlation, and of course, the correlation has to do with modernization, Americanization, a computer. Yeah, I mean, you have more roads, you have more internet, and
Exactly, yeah. So in the physical world, at least, globalization is having the effect of killing languages, a lot of languages. I was thinking in terms of, okay, there's a science historian I've been following. His name's James Burke. He's a British broadcaster as well. He had a series in like the 70s or 80s called Connections.
Yes.
He was kind of like a Carl Sagan sort of figure.
Connections or contact?
I think it was Connections.
Connections.
Yeah, so he made this very prescient prediction, which I think was probably even before the internet was around, because the show was quite old. He basically said, we are going to be moving from physical communities that are geographically bound to virtual, fluid communities. And that's what we've seen today. Like, basically the entire world is on the internet. But something that I was just thinking, and something I've noticed, I don't know if you would agree with this or not, but people are starting to occupy different pockets of the internet depending on their political positions, depending on their values, their interests, and all that. So it's kind of like in like the physical world, we're becoming more globalized. In the virtual world, we're becoming more fragmented. And
in fact, many people these days, they don't read newspapers. They only read what their celebrity tells them to. So these people are becoming, in fact, more and more narrow in their understanding of although you might think, nowadays every 5-year-olds understand everything, like Ukraine, Russia, news, whereas in the past you needed to read books. I mean, what was book reading like 500 years ago? It was about learning about the world. Now you just switch the TV and you learn about the world. But look, it's very much like that. It's like a roller coaster. So I would not argue that globalization is, of course, globalization is bad for languages. I mean, as a generalization. But as we do with language revival, we use technology in order to reconnect with languages that had been killed by technology. So globalization and the AIization, the AI, etc., might actually assist eventually small languages, because you would be able to use AI for language revival. And maybe in the future, you'll get a fish, a babblefish, Douglas Adams. I mean, you go to Thailand, you get anti-typhoid immunization, and also you get the Thai language injected into your system, and then you don't even need to learn. It's just like it comes.
It's like Neo in The Matrix when he's learning. Have you seen The Matrix?
Yeah, which one?
The first one, when he's learning, he learns kung fu or whatever. They just like they download the software onto him. Yeah, it's like that.
Exactly. So I think we will get there. Unfortunately, we will not be around. Unfortunately, unless we get the pill to live eternal life before that. Before then, I told one of my sons when he was younger that my father died, my mother died. I'm a round orphan, as they say in Russian, round orphan or circular orphan, meaning no parents. He asked me, Daddy, when you are old, will you also die? I said, no. When I'm old, there will be a pill that I take and I'll live forever. And he said, Daddy, please don't forget to take this pill. So he was so cute. It was so cute. I think it will happen, and then 700 languages in 100 years. Yeah, it will not happen before then. It will happen after, and then you will be able to revive old languages. And don't forget another thing. I believe that any person in the world should be a native speaker of 4 languages. Any person, any Australian, any person. The international language, American currently, it might be Mandarin one day if they pininize and get rid of the tones, but currently it's American. The national language, so say in Italy it's Italian. The heritage language, if you're Albanian in Italy, then it's Albanian. If you're Jewish, it might be Yiddish or what. And of course, the 4th language should be related to your ikigai, what you're good at, what the world needs, what you're paid for, and what else. So it's the interface of what you're good at, what the world needs, what you're paid for, and what you love. So your ikigai, if you're an opera singer in Australia, you should know Italian. If you're a chef of French cuisine, you should know French. If you're a ballet dancer, you should know French. So ikigai is hard to know when you're a child, but in theory, everybody should be fluent in 4 languages. So when people tell me, "Oh, Aboriginal people, they speak this language, because of that they don't speak proper English," it's absolutely untrue. We have researchers that show that the better you are in your Aboriginal language, the more kind of academic you arrive, the better you are in your English. So it's the opposite of what people think. So nobody said you can only speak 1 language. Now, glottophagy, I have to say, is a huge phenomenon. It's not linguicide. It's not like if you speak your language, I kill you. Right. It's much more, it's like the difference between rape and kind of coercing somebody to have sex with. So glottophagy is more civilized in quotation marks in the sense, but let's say you come from Italy to Australia 50 years ago. Your name is Roberto and you like to eat only pasta, and then you realize 50 years ago that people look at you, then your parents say, okay, let's call you Rob. Yeah, and let's go to the hamburger place. Is it glottophagy or is it linguicide? I mean, it's glottophagy more than linguicide. It's not like Aboriginal people, the natives would be sooner civilized if the language. But still, there was racism towards Italians. There was racism towards Greeks. They got rid of their languages. So very few Italians in Melbourne speak Italian. I'm talking about the 3rd generation. But then you see, there is a 3rd generation phenomenon. Hey, wait a second, my great-great-grandfather was in Calabria. I'm now going to Monash to study engineering. I want also to take Italian. So this is the 3rd generation phenomenon. So I think that you're right, there is globalization, but then we are not robots still. I mean, we are human beings. We have emotions. We have, we cry. We are not kind of. So I think that it's a roller coaster. So you see a decline, but then, boop, you have the 3rd or the 4th generation, then decline. Then.
Sure. Yeah, I was also kind of wondering in terms of the fragmentation within the virtual world as we sort of get siphoned off into our communities based off our interests and values and whatnot. that could present an opportunity for language revival, for new languages and all that as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And in fact, one of the indicators, one of the symptoms, you see communities of, say, Klingon.
Yeah.
Klingon, you know. So what? I mean, why a new language? I mean, you already have, no, you have people who, in fact, dedicate their lives and they speak to their kids in Klingon and you say, oh, wow, I mean, this is crazy. It's nerdy. It's geeky, you know, like, why? Well, for the same reason. I mean, you have people suddenly they have a hobby. I mean, why hobby? I mean, so this is beautiful. I mean, you have art. You know, I've just been to the art museum here. It's called Triennial.
Yeah, NGV.
Yeah, in NGV, the National Gallery of Victoria. You know, it's full of people, young people. It was unbelievable. I thought that, you know, like the young people don't care. No, it was full of young people. And so, look, I mean, it's not, you know, we are not doomed yet. You know, I mean, I don't know about nuclear wars, etc., but we are not doomed yet. And globalization, yeah, it means monolingualization on the one hand, but then technology will give us many diseases, but also many solutions, you know, for diseases that we create. So, you know, it's on the one hand, on the other hand.
Gilad, it's been a pleasure to talk to you.
Oh,
Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure.